Before I begin, I need you to do something right now. Think about how much money has passed through your hands over the last 5 years. Now tell me, where is that money? If that question made you uncomfortable, anxious, or even a little ashamed, stay here with me. Because what I'm going to reveal to you today is not in any finance book, not in any spreadsheet, and not in any investment course. It's inside you. There is a wound that most people carry since childhood, an emotional mark so deep and so silent that it operates in the dark, sabotaging every financial decision you make without you even noticing. Over the next few minutes, you're going to understand how that wound formed, what the signs are that you're carrying it right now, and most importantly of all, there is a 21-day protocol based on real neuroscience and validated behavioral psychology that can break this pattern once and for all. But I'm not going to give everything away right now. You're going to need to stay until the end because the pieces only make sense when you see the complete picture, and I promise that when you get there, something inside you is going to change, not like magic, like understanding. And understanding changes everything. There is a man. He wakes up every single day at 5:47 in the morning. Not because he likes waking up early, not because he has some kind of success routine, but because the anxiety won't let him sleep past that. He gets out of bed, walks to the kitchen of his rented apartment, makes the same bitter coffee he always makes, and before he even takes the first sip, he's already staring at the cracked ceiling, asking himself the same question he always asks. Why does the money never stay? He works. Nobody can deny that. He wakes up early, goes to bed late, takes on overtime, never complains about a task, never hesitates in the face of effort. He tries every way he knows how. But every time some money comes in, 3 unexpected bills appear out of nowhere. Every time he plans to take a step forward, something pulls him right back. And the worst part of all isn't the situation itself. The worst part is the voice. That internal voice that whispers very softly, almost like a secret he never wanted to hear. This isn't for you. This man is not a fictional character. This man is all of us at some point in our lives. And maybe you're living exactly this right now. Maybe you are that man or that woman who works hard, who genuinely puts in the effort, who does the right things on the surface, but who deep down feels that the money simply never stays. And the question I need you to ask yourself right now, with all the honesty you can gather, is this. Have you ever stopped to think that the problem might not be in your actions but in your mind? Not the way people usually say it, in a vague and generic way. I'm talking about something much more specific, much more concrete. I'm talking about a psychological mechanism that science has already mapped, already studied, already proven, and that has a name: prosperity block. And this block is not mysticism, it's not the law of attraction, it's not positive thinking, it's neuroscience. It's the way your brain was programmed in the first years of your life to react to money, to feel about abundance, and to make financial decisions without you having any awareness of it whatsoever. Now I need you to answer this honestly. When you receive an amount of money above what you're used to, what is the very first feeling you have? Is it pure joy? Is it relief? Or is there a sting of anxiety, a thought that it's going to run out, an urge to spend it quickly before it disappears? Pay close attention to that answer, because it's going to make a lot of sense very shortly. Psychology calls this the financial thermostat. Just like an air conditioning thermostat is programmed to maintain a specific temperature and reacts automatically when the temperature rises or drops too much, your brain has an emotional thermostat for money. And that thermostat was calibrated long before you had any ability to question or decide anything. It was calibrated when you were a child. Between the ages of 0 and 7, the human brain operates at a frequency that neuroscientists call the theta state, which is practically identical to the hypnotic state. In that state, everything you see, hear, feel, and experience goes directly into your subconscious as an absolute truth, without any filter, without critical analysis, without questioning. It's the period when you learn that 2 + 2 is 4, that fire burns, that dogs bark. But it's also the period when you learn what money is, what it means, whether it's dangerous or safe, whether you deserve to have it or not. And the problem is that much of what we learn about money during that period is learned the wrong way. Not because the adults around us were bad people, but because they themselves carried their own wounds, their own limiting beliefs, their own dysfunctional relationships with money, and passed all of that on to us in the most natural and most invisible way possible, through the environment, through conversations, through looks, through silences. Did you ever hear any of these phrases as a child? Money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people are crooks. We're not a wealthy family. Money is the root of all evil. Hard work is the only honest thing. Anyone who wants more than they need is greedy. If you heard any of those phrases or variations of them, I need you to understand something very important. Those phrases didn't just stay in your memory as past recollections. They were engraved in your subconscious as operational truths, as programs that run in the background every time you're about to receive money, negotiate a raise, open an investment account, or charge for your work. And those programs sabotage everything before you even realize what happened. You know that feeling of having an opportunity right in front of you and, without really understanding why, you just don't grab it? Or of receiving good financial news and immediately starting to think about everything that could go wrong? Or of feeling physical discomfort when someone talks about charging more for your work? That's not a lack of courage. That's not a lack of intelligence. That's your financial thermostat functioning exactly the way it was programmed to function during your childhood. And the good news, and this is the part that most people don't know, is that this thermostat can be reconfigured. It's not a magical or instantaneous process, but it is a real process based on how the brain learns and unlearns patterns, and it works. But before I show you how to do that, I need you to understand what the 4 signs are that you're carrying this block right now. Because a lot of people go through their entire lives without recognizing these signs, attributing their financial problems to external factors, to the economy, to the government, to bad luck, when in reality the root is inside. The first sign is what I call the sieve syndrome. You've probably heard the expression trying to carry water in a sieve. That's exactly what this is. The money comes in, but it doesn't stay. You earn well, but at the end of the month, there's always something missing. You pay off one debt and another one appears. You start to save money and something unexpected happens that consumes it all. It seems like coincidence. It seems like bad luck. But when this happens in a systematic and repetitive way over years, it's not coincidence. It's a pattern. And patterns have a psychological origin. The subconscious that was programmed to believe that money is dangerous, that wealth is wrong, or that you don't deserve to have more than you have, will find creative and unconscious ways to get rid of any excess. It will create urgencies. It will awaken impulses to spend. It will find opportunities to spend money that seem absolutely justified in the moment, but that in the overall balance always leave you at the same level or below it. Do you identify with this? Think about your financial trajectory over the last 10 years. Did the income level change? Maybe it did. But did the level of net worth, the level of real money left over at the end of the month, the level of financial security change in the same proportion? If it didn't, that's the first sign. The second sign is prosperity guilt. This is one of the most treacherous because it disguises itself as virtue. The person who suffers from prosperity guilt feels genuine discomfort when they earn money above what they consider their place to be. They feel like they're betraying their people of origin when they start to have more than those people had. They feel like they don't deserve the success, that they're going to be judged, that they're going to lose the people they love if they grow too much. This pattern is especially common in people who grew up in working class or middle class families and managed to move up. On the outside, the achievement is happening. On the inside, there's a silent sabotage that says, "You're going too far, get back to your place." And then the person unconsciously starts making decisions that pull them back. They spend more than they should. They lend money they don't have. They accept work conditions below what they deserve. They avoid negotiating. They hesitate to charge. All with justifications that seem reasonable, but that at their core serve one single purpose: to make sure they don't drift too far from the limits that were defined for them back in childhood. Have you ever felt that discomfort when things start going too well? Have you ever sabotaged an opportunity without really understanding why? Have you ever felt that growing financially would somehow be a betrayal of someone or something? If yes, that's the second sign. The third sign is negotiation aversion. People with a prosperity block have an enormous difficulty negotiating, not because they don't know how, but because negotiating activates a series of unconscious beliefs about worthiness, about vanity, about greed. Asking for a raise feels like presumption. Charging more for a service feels like abuse. Negotiating the price of something feels like humiliation, or, paradoxically, like greed. And so the person accepts less than they deserve, delivers more than they should, and accumulates a silent resentment that never transforms into real change, because the root of the problem is never touched. Can you ask for a raise when you know you deserve it? Can you charge the fair price for your work without feeling guilty? Can you negotiate without feeling uncomfortable? If the answer is no, or if there's any hesitation in that answer, that's the third sign. The fourth sign is the most subtle and perhaps the most powerful of all. It's anger toward those who have more. There's an emotional reaction that many people have when they see someone successful, someone with money, someone living comfortably. Instead of inspiration, what arises is anger, judgment, distrust, the immediate certainty that that person obtained what they have dishonestly, or that they got lucky, or that they didn't deserve it. This reaction seems like a moral stance, a defense of the right values. But in psychology, it has another name. It's the projection of a limiting belief. When you believe, at the subconscious level, that money is associated with dishonesty, greed, or exploitation, you're going to see that in everyone who has money. And at the same time, you're going to unconsciously ensure that you never become that. You'll never be dishonest or greedy or exploitative. You'll never have a lot of money. Because having a lot of money in your internal programming means being what you despise. This is subtle but devastating. Because it means that your own morality, your own identity as a good and fair person, is being used against your own prosperity. Have you ever felt automatic anger or distrust when you saw someone successful? Have you ever judged someone just for having money? That's the fourth sign. And if you identified with any of those four, I need you to understand something fundamental. This is not weakness. It's not a character flaw. It's programming that was installed without your consent, long before you had any ability to choose what to believe. And programming can be changed. But first you need to understand more deeply where it came from. Because understanding the origin is an essential part of the healing process. So let's go back to childhood, not in a nostalgic or sentimental way, in a surgical way. The way money was handled in your family of origin created an emotional map that you use to this day to navigate every financial decision you make. That map may have been created by words spoken directly, like the phrases I mentioned earlier. But it may also have been created by things that were never said, by behaviors you observed, by emotions you felt in the environment without understanding what they were. If you grew up in a house where conversations about money were always tense and full of fear, you learned that money is a source of conflict and suffering. If you grew up watching your parents work themselves to exhaustion and still never have enough, you learned that effort leads nowhere. If you grew up watching someone waste money or lose everything, you may have learned that money isn't reliable, that it's better not even to try to accumulate it because it's going to be lost anyway. If you grew up being shielded from any discussion about money with parents who never talked about it, you may have learned that money is a forbidden subject, something you don't discuss, something you don't understand, and you carried that fog with you for the rest of your life. Which of those stories resonates with you? Because that's not a rhetorical question. It's a genuine and important question. Because when you can identify where your programming came from, you begin to gain perspective on it. And perspective is power. Because you stop being the character in the story and start being the observer. And the observer can change the script. Now I want to tell you about something that neuroscientists call somatic memory. It's the memory that isn't stored in the brain as a narrative recollection, but is stored in the body as a sensation. When you were a child, and you lived through a situation of scarcity, of fear around money, of conflict, your body registered that experience as a physical sensation. And every time you face a similar financial situation as an adult, even when consciously and rationally you know the situation is different, your body reacts with the same sensation as when you were a child. A tightness in the chest, a tension in the shoulders, a knot in the stomach, a heat in the face. These sensations are messengers from the past. They are your nervous system saying, "Careful, this feels dangerous. I remember this sensation." And as long as you don't recognize and reframe these sensations, they keep piloting your financial decisions from behind the scenes, like an invisible conductor you didn't know existed. Have you ever noticed that you have physical reactions in financial situations? Nervousness before a business meeting? A block before sending a price proposal? An inexplicable anxiety when your paycheck arrives? Pay attention to those reactions. They are data. They are precious information about where the wound is. Now, I want to introduce you to something that's going to connect everything I've said so far with something practical, something you can start working on today. I call it the 21-day mental protocol. But before I explain the protocol, I need to tell you why 21 days. Neuroscience has discovered that the brain takes an average of 21 days of consistent practice to begin creating new neural pathways. It's not that in 21 days you're completely transformed. It's that in 21 days you've interrupted the old pattern enough for the brain to begin registering a new possibility. It's the beginning of reprogramming. It's planting the seed before expecting the tree. And reprogramming doesn't happen through willpower. It doesn't happen by repeating affirmations in the mirror without understanding what you're doing. It happens through specific practices that access the subconscious in ways that the conscious mind cannot. I'm going to explain the 3 pillars of this protocol. The first pillar is what I call emotional tracking. During the 21 days, every time you have any interaction with money, any at all, paying a bill, receiving a payment, seeing an opportunity, thinking about asking for a raise, you're going to stop for 30 seconds and ask yourself one simple question. What am I feeling right now? Not what you're thinking. What you're feeling. There's a crucial difference here. The thought is the conscious level, the rational, what you can easily verbalize. The sensation is the subconscious level, the emotional, what sits beneath the thought and actually drives behavior. When you start tracking the emotions associated with money on a regular basis, you start to see patterns. You start to notice that certain types of financial situations always activate the same sensations. And when you can see the pattern, you begin to have power over it. Because recognizing is the first step toward transforming. The second pillar is memory reframing. This is the most powerful and the most delicate one. It works like this. You're going to identify a specific childhood memory associated with a negative experience with money. It might be an argument you witnessed. It might be a moment of humiliation. It might be a deprivation that left a mark. It might be a phrase you heard repeated over and over. You're going to revisit that memory, but this time not as the child who was there, but as the conscious adult you are today. And you're going to do something the child couldn't do. You're going to give that experience a new meaning. This isn't about erasing the memory. It's about changing the interpretation of it. It's about separating the fact from the meaning you assigned to the fact. For example, if you remember your father saying that money doesn't grow on trees in a tone of despair and resignation, the child you were probably internalized that is a truth about the world. Money is scarce, difficult, and no matter how hard you try, it's never enough. But the adult you are today can look at that scene and understand something completely different. That your father was scared, that he was doing the best he could with the tools he had, that he was expressing his own fear, not a universal law about reality. And when you change the interpretation of the memory, you change the program it installed. This isn't easy. There may be emotional resistance, sadness may arise, anger, confusion, and all of that is part of the process. Don't try to rush it. Let the emotion be there without judging it. The third pillar is the creation of new identity references. One of the biggest misconceptions in the world of financial development is thinking that change starts with behavior. Thinking that if you change what you do, you'll change who you are. The truth is exactly the opposite. You need to change who you believe you are before behaviors change in a sustainable way. Because behavior is always an expression of identity. You act in accordance with who you believe you are. If you believe you're someone who never has money, you'll act in ways that confirm that belief. If you start to identify as someone who has a healthy and abundant relationship with money, your behaviors will start to align with that new identity, not in a magical way, but in a gradual and consistent way. Because the brain seeks internal coherence. The practice here is simple but powerful. During the 21 days, you're going to write daily, even if it's just one sentence, a financial identity statement. Not in the future tense, like I'm going to be. In the present tense, like I am. And not a fantasized statement that your conscious mind is going to reject immediately. Something that's one step above where you are, but not so distant that it feels like a lie. For example, if you're used to believing that you never have money, you don't start with, I am a millionaire. You start with something like, I am someone who is learning to have a better relationship with money. Or, I am someone who notices and appreciates every amount of money that comes into my life. Or, I am someone who is building a relationship of trust with prosperity. Do those sound too simple? I understand that reaction. But the power of those statements isn't in the words themselves. It's in the consistent repetition that, over time, begins to create a new frequency of identity in the subconscious. And new identity generates new behaviors. New behaviors generate new results. New results confirm the new identity. It's a virtuous cycle, but it begins with the seed. And the seed is the statement. Now I want to talk about something that is rarely discussed and that I consider absolutely fundamental to understanding the prosperity block in depth, the relationship between belonging and prosperity. Human beings are social animals. Belonging, the feeling of being accepted and being part of a group, is a psychological need as fundamental as eating and sleeping. And during childhood, when that need for belonging is at its peak, any threat to belonging is perceived by the nervous system as a threat to survival. So what happens when a child starts to sense that if they step too far outside the box, if they want too much, if they dream too big, they risk being different from the family group, being seen as different from their friends, being judged? The nervous system immediately starts creating containment mechanisms. It starts putting the brakes on the impulses toward growth, expansion, and seeking more. Because growing too much might mean losing the sense of belonging. And losing belonging is, for the primitive nervous system, an existential threat. This creates a pattern I call the tribal brake. The tribal brake is that invisible force that pulls you back every time you start going too far. It's the fear of being different. It's the fear of being envied. It's the fear of losing the people you love by having more than they do. It's the belief that growing is dangerous for your relationships. And this brake operates in an absolutely unconscious way, disguising itself as prudence, as humility, as solidarity, when in reality it's fear. Pure, primitive survival fear. Have you ever downplayed a financial achievement so as not to bother someone? Have you ever avoided talking about a success so as not to generate envy? Have you ever turned down an opportunity because it would distance you from a group you belong to? That's the tribal brake in action. And recognizing this doesn't mean abandoning your roots, doesn't mean turning your back on your family or your friends. It means understanding that growing is not betraying. It means creating a new narrative where your prosperity can coexist with your relationships, where you can be successful and still belong, where success doesn't have to cost you the love of the people who matter. And that new narrative needs to be built consciously, because the subconscious will keep operating from the old narrative until you deliberately decide to replace it. How do you do that? Through what psychology calls reframing. It's the practice of taking a belief and deliberately choosing a different perspective on it. Not denying the old belief, not pretending it doesn't exist, but presenting to the subconscious an alternative interpretation that is equally plausible and far more useful. For example, the old belief might be, if I get rich, I'll lose my real friends. The reframe would be, when I prosper, I'll have more resources to be a better friend, more present, more generous, more capable of helping when it's needed. The old belief, my family will see me differently if I have money. The reframe, my prosperity can inspire and open doors for the people I love. The old belief, rich people are arrogant, and I don't want to be like that. The reframe, I can have abundance and continue being exactly who I am, with the same values, the same essence. These reframes don't work if they're only intellectual. They need to be felt. They need to be repeated. They need to become part of the internal conversation you have with yourself every day. And over time, they begin to replace the old programs, not all at once, gradually. Like weeds being pulled out and replanted with something that nourishes instead of destroys. Now, I want to talk to you about something I call the vocabulary of scarcity. Because the words you use, not just to speak with others, but especially the words you use in your head when thinking about money, are far more powerful than most people imagine. Words are not just descriptions of reality. They create reality. They activate specific emotional states. They reinforce beliefs. They build or destroy identities. There's very interesting research in the field of linguistic psychology showing that certain words and phrases activate the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain, in very specific ways. And when the limbic system is activated by words of scarcity, of fear, of limitation, it enters a state that is literally the opposite of the state needed to make good financial decisions, to see opportunities, to act with confidence and clarity. So tell me, do you use phrases like, I never have money, I'm always in the red, money is hard, I can't save anything, there's always something missing, nothing ever left over? Every time you use those phrases, especially in the first person and in the present tense, you're reinforcing a program in your subconscious. You're telling your brain, this is the normal state. This is the state in which I exist. And the brain, which is a machine that seeks coherence, will work tirelessly to confirm that state as true. Not because the brain is your enemy, but because the brain doesn't distinguish between what you want to be true and what you declare to be true. It works with what you give it. So what happens when you start replacing that vocabulary of scarcity with a vocabulary of possibility? Not in a naive way, not pretending a reality that doesn't exist, but with honesty and intention. Instead of I never have money, you say, I'm in the process of building a better relationship with money. Instead of nothing is ever left over, you say, I'm learning to direct what comes in more effectively. Instead of money is hard, you say, I'm discovering ways to make money work in my favor. The difference between those pairs of phrases is not merely semantic, it's neurological. They activate different brain states. And different brain states generate different perceptions, and different perceptions generate different actions, and different actions generate different results. It's a chain of cause and effect that begins at the most basic level, the word you choose. And you're going to ask me, but how do I change the vocabulary I use in my head if it's automatic? That's an excellent question. And the answer is with the practice of conscious interruption. Every time you notice that you're using a scarcity phrase internally, you stop, you breathe, and you deliberately replace it with the possibility alternative. At first, you're going to catch it late. You're going to notice the phrase after you've already said it. That's fine. Over time, you start to notice it sooner. And then you start to notice it while it's happening. And eventually, the new pattern begins to take hold. It's not an overnight transformation. It's a construction, brick by brick, word by word. Now I need to talk about something that is perhaps the most painful aspect of this entire process, and that I think is important to address with honesty. Sometimes the prosperity block is so deeply rooted that working on it alone isn't enough. Sometimes the memories are too heavy, the emotions are too intense, the patterns are too entrenched to be undone only through self-awareness practices. And in that case, seeking specialized support, whether through psychotherapy, through coaching focused on financial psychology, or through other modalities of working with the unconscious, is not a sign of weakness. It's intelligence. It's recognizing that some wounds need a hand that isn't yours to be treated. And there's no shame in that. There's maturity, because the greatest wisdom there is involves recognizing what you need and having the courage to go after it. That said, there's a great deal you can do on your own, and the protocol I described is a real and genuine starting point. But I want to add one final layer to it, which is what I call the financial gratitude anchor. Research in positive psychology, especially the studies of Robert Emmons and Martin Seligman, shows that the regular practice of gratitude has measurable effects on psychological well-being, emotional resilience, and the ability to perceive opportunities. And within the context of the prosperity block, financial gratitude has a specific and very powerful role. It starts to train the brain to notice and register abundance instead of scarcity. This isn't cheap positive philosophy. It's a way of directing the brain's attention. The human brain processes far more information than it can bring to consciousness, so it uses attention filters to decide what reaches conscious perception. And one of the most powerful filters is expectation. What you expect to see, you tend to see. If you expect scarcity, the brain filters reality in favor of scarcity. If you start training the expectation of abundance, the brain starts filtering in favor of abundance. The financial gratitude anchor practice works like this. Every day, preferably in the morning, you identify 3 specific things related to money for which you can be genuinely grateful. Not generic, not I have my health and my family, which is important but not specific enough for this purpose. Specific. Today, I have money to buy the food I'm going to eat. I have a roof over my head that I pay for. I have a skill that generates income. I have access to opportunities that my family never had. Every amount of money that comes in, no matter how small, is an opportunity to practice this anchor. And what happens over time is that the brain starts to register the abundance that already exists as something real and concrete, instead of treating it as invisible and irrelevant while focusing on the problems. And when you start to perceive the abundance that already exists, you create an emotional state that is more favorable for attracting and maintaining more abundance. Not through the mystical law of attraction, through the psychology of emotional state that influences decisions, creativity, the willingness to act, and the ability to see opportunities. I want to tell you now about a woman named Rita. She was 52 years old when she began working on these patterns. Her life on the outside was reasonably stable. She had a steady job, a paid-off home she owned, 3 grown children. But on the inside, she lived with a constant financial anxiety that made no sense given her objective reality. She checked her bank balance several times a day. She couldn't spend money without feeling guilty, even on necessary things. And at the same time, she had episodes of impulsive spending that afterward filled her with shame. It was as if there were 2 Ritas, one who saved obsessively and one who spent destructively, and neither of them was truly in control. When Rita began to investigate the origin of that pattern, she remembered something she had kept buried very deep for a very long time. She grew up in a house where her father spent all of the family's money on gambling. There was no financial predictability. There were weeks of illusory abundance and weeks of real terror. And the child she was had learned 2 simultaneous and contradictory lessons. Save everything because money disappears, and spend it quickly because tomorrow there might not be any more. Those 2 contradictory lessons created a divided internal system that she carried for the following 50 years without ever being conscious of where it came from. When she understood that, something changed. Not in a dramatic way, but in a real way. She was able to look at the child she had been and feel compassion for her instead of shame for herself. And from that compassion, she began to make different choices, not perfect ones, not radically transformed overnight, but different, more conscious, more aligned with who she wanted to be. Rita's story is not extraordinary, it's common. More common than most people imagine. And that's why I believe this work is one of the most important things any person can do for their own financial life. Because you can optimize all the external parameters, you can have the best spreadsheet, the best investment fund, the best financial mentor. And if the subconscious is operating against you, nothing will work in a sustainable way. But when the subconscious starts working in your favor, when the internal programming starts to align with the external objectives, the transformation happens in a way that feels almost organic. The right decisions start to feel natural instead of difficult. Opportunities start to appear, or better said, you start to notice them because your attention filter has changed. The relationship with money starts to become calmer, more confident, more intentional. And that calmness isn't indifference. It's clarity. It's the difference between acting out of fear and acting out of choice. And acting out of choice is the foundation of any real and sustainable financial construction. I now want to make a connection that few people make, but that I consider absolutely essential: the connection between the prosperity block and the physical body. We live in a culture that treats the mind and the body as separate things, especially when the subject is money and finance. We talk about psychology, behavior, and beliefs as if they were purely mental phenomena. But the truth is that every emotional experience has a physical expression. Every financial fear has a location in the body where it lives, and ignoring that is ignoring half of the problem. There's a field of psychology called somatic psychology that studies exactly this: how unprocessed emotional experiences are stored in the body as tension, contraction, altered breathing patterns, and how releasing those physical tensions is part of the process of releasing emotional blocks. Have you ever noticed where in your body you feel financial anxiety? Is it in the chest, in the stomach, in the shoulders, in the throat? That location is not random. It's the map of your nervous system showing where the experience was stored. And one of the simplest and most powerful ways to begin working with this somatic aspect is through conscious breathing. It doesn't need to be any elaborate technique. All you need to do when you notice a physical tension associated with a financial situation is stop for a few seconds. Place your attention on the location of the tension in your body and breathe slowly and consciously for 3 or 4 cycles. This isn't going to resolve the block, but it will start to create a space between the stimulus and the response. And that space is where consciousness lives. It's where choice is born. It's where change begins. Now, before I tell you about the final phase of this process, I want you to do something right now. I want you to write in the comments your biggest financial pain today. It might be a debt that seems to have no end. It might be the fear of spending even when you can afford to. It might be the anger of watching other people prosper while you feel like you're standing still. It might be the shame of not having more than you have at your age. It can be anything. But write it with honesty. Because naming the pain out loud, or in this case, in writing, is an act of courage that has a real effect on emotional processing. When you keep a pain in the dark, it grows. When you bring it into the light and name it, you start to have power over it. And I read every comment. I'm going to respond to the most honest ones with personalized guidance based on what you share. Because this channel exists to be a real tool in your transformation, not just content you consume and forget. So write it down. The final phase of the process I want to address is what I call prosperous identity integration. You've worked on emotional tracking. You've worked on memory reframing. You've worked on creating new identity references. You've worked on reframing the tribal beliefs. You've worked on the vocabulary of possibility. You've worked on the financial gratitude anchor. Now, the moment has come to integrate all of that into a cohesive and new identity. An identity that doesn't deny where you came from, but that deliberately chooses where it's going. And that identity is built not only internally, but also externally, through symbolic behaviors that confirm it. What are symbolic behaviors? They are small actions, sometimes very small, that serve as concrete proof to your subconscious that the new identity is real. For example, if you're building the identity of someone who has a healthy relationship with money, a symbolic behavior might be opening an investment account, even if you deposit just $50. The amount doesn't matter. The act matters. The act tells the subconscious, I am someone who invests. If you're working on the belief that you deserve to be paid for your value, a symbolic behavior might be charging the correct amount from a client, without a discount, without excessive justification, with the calmness of someone who knows what they deliver. If you're working on the tribal break, a symbolic behavior might be speaking openly about a financial achievement with someone close to you without minimizing it, without apologizing for it, without diminishing it. Each of those behaviors seems small, but each one is proof, and proof accumulates. And when enough proof accumulates, the subconscious starts to build a new narrative about who you are, and new narrative generates new behavior. And new behavior generates new results, and new results confirm the new narrative. It's a virtuous cycle that, once started, begins to propel itself forward. But it needs to begin. And beginning is always the hardest step because it starts in the void, in the place where the result doesn't yet exist, to confirm to you that you're on the right track. It's the most important act of faith you'll ever take, acting like the person you want to be before you have the proof that you are that person. But what kind of faith is that? It's not blind faith. It's faith based on understanding. It's you understanding the mechanism, understanding how the brain works, understanding why the patterns formed, understanding how they can be changed, and then acting based on that understanding even before seeing the results. That's the faith that builds. It's not naivety, it's intelligence applied with courage. Now I want to close with something I consider the most important truth of everything I said today. And it's something simple, but that carries the weight of a revelation when you truly understand it. Money is not far from you because the world is unfair, although it sometimes is. It's not far because you lack talent, because you have it. It's not far because you don't work hard, because you do. Money is far because there's a part of you that believes it should be far. And that part is not your essence. It's not who you really are. It's programming that you received before you had the capacity to choose what to receive. And programming can be rewritten. That is the promise that neuroscience and psychology make, not a promise that it will be easy, not a promise that it will happen fast, but a promise that it is possible. And possible, when added to understanding and consistent action, transforms into real. The man who wakes up at 5:47 in the morning, staring at the cracked ceiling, doesn't have to keep being who he's always been. He can start today with an honest question, with a revisited memory, with a different word in his head, with an identity statement written in a notebook, with the courage to name the pain in a comment, with the first step of a 21-day protocol that could be the beginning of the greatest transformation of his financial life. You made it to the end of this content, and that already tells me something about you. You are someone who seeks more than the surface, someone who is willing to go deep. And that's exactly the kind of person who has what it takes to do this work. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need extra money. You don't need more time. You need honesty with yourself and the willingness to do differently what you have always done the same way. The next step is yours, and it begins right now.